Hello, I'm Dr. William Schlosser, Washington State University, School of the Environment. This is my classroom.
I enjoy playing chess. I started playing it with my children and now their children when they were each youngish, like 2 or 3 years old. It is a game of thinking, strategy, and enjoyment on a board game. As I taught my kids to play this game, I tell them they should never dismiss any of their players as inconsequential, not a bishop, a rook, or a pawn. You may never know when you needed that player to save the entire kingdom. In ecology, this same theme may save our earthly ecosystems. None of the players are inconsequential. Don't treat them like they are. In the words of Joe De La Cruz, past president, Quinault Indian Nation, quote, "What we do to the land, we do to ourselves," end quote. In 2007, windstorms broke down large trees along the Olympic Peninsula. Which species were harmed by this incident? Which ones benefited? This was a natural event caused by winds blowing off the open sea. We need to watch this question about who benefits and who loses in each natural disaster event. Sea otters hold a special place in this Keystone Species discussion. Watch to discover how. These cute little sea pups serve a critical position in their ecosystems. Most important, we need to understand how far their ecosystems reach. We explore a section of ecological study where we discover how and why species interact with each other. You will remember me asking what wildlife need from their environment, then flip it to ask what the environment needs from its wildlife. This scrapes the meaning from how interactions shape the responses by other species in their space. These interaction results are not always immediate. That means it takes us humans longer to realize what our actions cause at their fullest impact. This is not a semester of observations. It is a couple lifetimes of observation and understanding. As we initiate this exploration, we begin with some background details about biodiversity and how new energy is acquired on this planet. This flow of energy dictates how we all thrive and survive. There is much we do not know about the consequences of the loss of biodiversity. Some argue that species loss has caused no major problems thus far. Well, the longer we heedlessly destroy habitat and threaten the viability of life forms, the greater our risk of serious ecological collapse. We are eating away at life's insurance policy and meddling with the natural balance of the ecosphere. At the very least, we need to recognize what is happening and discover where some of the players were historically considered inconsequential. You already know my feelings about that. A food web consists of all the food chains in an ecosystem. Each living thing in an ecosystem is part of multiple food chains. Each food chain is one possible path that energy and nutrients may take as they move through the ecosystem. Think of participants as links in the food chain. It might start with the grass, then that energy is eaten by a rabbit, next to a fox, then maybe a hawk who eats a fox. All of these interconnected and overlapping food chains in an ecosystem make up a food web. Photoautotrophs capture the sun's energy and use it to make organic compounds through photosynthesis. The process of photosynthesis transforms carbon dioxide and water into simple carbohydrates. The photoautotrophs then use the simple carbohydrates to build other more complex organic molecules, like proteins, lipids, and starches, that are either used as building blocks for their cells or stored for later use. When the plant is eaten by herbivores, those simple carbohydrates are incorporated into that animal's store of energy. Algae and plankton are the main producers in the marine ecosystems. Tiny shrimp called krill eat the microscopic plankton. The largest animal on Earth, the blue whale, preys on thousands of tons of krill every day. Apex predators such as orcas prey on blue whales and salmon. As salmon return to their natal streams, they will spawn and die. The nutrients from their decaying bodies is transferred back to their streams to provide nutrition for their young. Photoautotrophs are often also called primary producers because they establish the basis for most energy production. They create organic material from inorganic sources. It really comes around to those primary producers who are all organisms that convert sunlight to energy, all made possible by photosynthesis. The primary consumers are the herbivores, who eat the green plants. Secondary consumers eat those herbivores. The tertiary consumers eat other carnivores. At some point, all animals and plants die. Decomposers such as worms and mushrooms break down these bodies, returning them to the soil where they provide nutrients for plants. Detrivores turn the biologically inactive bodies into nutrient-rich substrate. The circle of life continues. Food webs connect many different food chains and many different trophic levels. Food webs can support food chains that are long and complicated, or very short. We revisit this marine ecosystem. Krill eat microscopic plankton. Here, the plankton are the primary producers, turning sunlight into energy. The blue whale preys on thousands of tons of krill every day. The nutrients released by decaying flesh provide chemicals for algae and plankton to start a new series of food chains. We will work through food webs, which are in recognition of the many pathways energy flows through countless food chains. It becomes more complicated when we recognize that some players are both herbivores and carnivores. Those are animals like us, the omnivores. Not all critters have this ability, but food webs capture this encompassing net. An energy pyramid shows how energy moves throughout an ecosystem. As you move up the pyramid levels, approximately 90% of the food's original energy is lost from level to level because animals must use their own energy to consume and digest food. The consumers, at the top of the pyramid, do not capture all the energy that was initially used to make the primary producers succeed. For us, this becomes actionable pretty fast. I think about the kale wrap I had for lunch today. The wrap is made from wheat. Inside is kale, and some sliced avocado for dressing. This is all from the bottom of the pyramid, and my stomach can easily digest it. I get about 90% of the energy that was originally captured by the kale plant. I eat this meal that took about 1,000 kcal to make. When I ate the venison I harvested, that energy was captured by the deer first when the 1,000 kcal was captured. But of that energy, only about 100 kcal made it to the meat. The deer had a cost of energy conversion to digest it and convert it to usable energy. Then when I ate the venison steak, my body was only able to capture about 10 kcal from the original 1,000. I took the role of the secondary consumer. It takes my system more effort to digest meat than just kale and beets. If I were to eat a cougar steak, or maybe a bear sausage, the amount of energy needed to capture the producer-gained energy, converted to primary consumer energy, then to the secondary and tertiary consumers, would be multiplicatively large. Then, if I eat that bear sausage, the amount of energy I gain would be super small in comparison to the amount of energy needed to make it happen in the first place. The energy I would need for digestion of the cougar steak pales in comparison to how much energy it costs to place it. This is the energy pyramid. A phenomenon is an observable occurrence. Many times it is considered as being unexplainable. That is not obligatory. An ecological phenomenon is an occurrence that can be observed in organisms and their responses to their environment. Ecology studies these changes in distributions, abundance, and relations of organisms. We study these to better understand these interactions so we can observe and predict ecological phenomena in specific examples and in the broader examples we encounter. I speak of spatial and temporal scales to be applied to observations we make and predictions we create. Scale refers to physical dimensions of observed entities and phenomena, recorded as a quantity and involves, or at least implies, measurement and measurement units. Einstein never interpreted time, t, as a fourth dimension of space. Space is not 3D plus T. Space is 4D. With clocks, we measure numerical order of material change. This numerical order is the only time that exists in a physical world. Time is our perpetual conjugation, shared around the world, to apply as we see fit. At least this way, we all share the same change metric. Individuals grow and mature individually. Some successfully thrive and survive, some die, and each expresses its success based on its conversion of energy, water, and protection. It is all about safe places and protection. In the case of the oak tree, it needs to be able to succeed every day throughout its life. Sometimes it is just like our game of chess, safety and protection. Let one player go and the rest will react to its departure. It can be a tree, deer, or otter, but populations need protection persistently and confidently. Floods washed out river drainages in western interior Alaska in 2004. Riparian areas were scoured of vegetation. Detritus was displaced. In British Columbia, Canada, western pine beetle broke out on the coastal and interior forests to kill millions of hectares of trees. Within a couple of years of insect-infected dead trees, and in areas otherwise thought of as healthy, were embraced by high temperatures, low humidity, and seasonal winds to create firestorms. A windstorm near Coeur d'Alene, Idaho in 1989 swept across thinned forests to snap off the tops of all standing trees. The timber harvest intent was improved forest health, but the windstorm resulted in landscape-level destruction and forest fires. A study by Harvard University researchers, supported by the National Science Foundation and published in the Journal of Ecology, yields a surprising result. When it comes to forest health, native plants, and wildfire, the best management decision may be to do nothing. Natural abiotic forces are pervasive and random. This is how they were developed over millennia. Consider multiple levels of biological organization and abiotic forces bringing energy to forest lands. That sounds simple, but ask yourself, how old is that forest? What species are in this population? Where is it located? Put this into an ecological context to account for biological phenomena by considering the underlying molecular interactions, energy reserves, and resilience, one organism at a time. Consider responses and reactions to disturbances, like a forest wildfire. It matters when the disruption happens in the age-class distribution of the population. Natural systems are driven by the ways in which organisms interact with one another and with their physical environment. These interactions create connectivity throughout and between natural systems. We follow the flow of energy as it moves through these interactions. You will see images like this one often. At the foundation, P is for producers. These are the photoautotrophs, the photosynthesizing plants, the original sunlight-capturing energy cells of biotic life. This is where new energy all starts, begins at the sun, is photosynthesized, and made into plant cells. The cafe is open. Step it up to the H level to find herbivores, those animals who eat plants. Actually, this level also finds omnivores, so I slipped in an O for them as well. These are the participants who translate the original energy from plants into energy for animals. This unique squad can translate the plant cells into energy as they grow muscle cells, fats, hair, and all the things that make these omnivores and herbivores what they really are. You and I are part of this squad, but that does not mean that we can eat all plants and digest them. If you question that, then try to eat your kale leaf sandwich by replacing the kale with alfalfa from a bale. You cannot get benefit from that energy source. We are just not made to digest everything we eat. However, when herbivores and omnivores eat their preferred plants, they grow their own cells and build muscles and fats to continue the energy transfer track. Where you find highly productive sites that grow lush plant life, you will also find a robust herbivore life. When we step up to C for carnivores, we find another unique troop with open space for omnivores. Here we need to clarify the difference between carnivores and omnivores. Carnivores need to eat meat to thrive and survive. They need the high-protein diet to maintain their systems. They do not make the enzymes to digest plants. Our dogs are members of this carnivore pack, and you might feed it some food with greens and cheese. Those are in the dog food can, so you think it must be fine. Just because the carnivore eats the greens, it does not mean it can digest them. I know my dog used to eat some grass now and again. That confused me. Then, my WSU veterinarian colleague told me the dog was eating it to settle its stomach. He was just doing some home medicine treatments. Not to worry, he is still a carnivore. In a few weeks, I am going to strike this match again using coyote scat filled with service berries. Think about how that mutt had those in its scat. Talk about that one. We will be visiting it again. Maybe sooner than you think. Okay, now we step into the top of this pyramid, TC. That is the top carnivore. We also call this the apex predator. The wolf is a large carnivore. It only eats meat and requires a diet high in protein. Wolves are also referred to as top-level predators because there is no other wild animal that hunts wolves to eat them. Recognize that you are looking at a system of interactions. These interactions build on each other and depend on them. What I do today will impact you and how you react to it. What you do will help to guide my responses. In ecology, we take these to the extremely long temporal scale, reaching dozens, hundreds, thousands of years, even into millennia. The wolf is both an apex predator and a keystone species, affecting its prey's behavior and the wider ecosystem context. As we look to wolves in the continental United States, we need to recognize that in 1915, President Theodore Roosevelt called for the extermination of all wolves from the continental United States. Some areas, like Washington's Olympic Peninsula, called them removed by 1926. The Yellowstone National Park declared them expatriated in 1935. Nationwide removal of wolves was considered fundamentally complete by 1960. The Endangered Species Act of 1973, the ESA, was enacted into law by the United States Congress, implemented by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, the US FWS. For the last 45 years, wolf habitat has witnessed the return of this apex predator, and with their return, several interconnected linkages have started reestablishment. Discovery of these associations is a lifelong journey. We will continue this recognition. We have covered some broad background materials to bring us to this point. Now we get to light that candle to put some illumination on the topics of ecological connectivity. We begin this investigation by looking at the monarch butterfly. This seemingly simple insect has an incredibly complex life cycle spanning thousands of miles, beat by the tiniest of wings, and exemplifying the power of heredity. Millions of monarch butterflies annually migrate to and from their homelands in the mountains of Mexico, crossing the United States, and entering Canada. We will join one video documentary of this journey. Look for the connectivity and associations these butterflies enact.
Hold on. Oh my gosh. The trees are like made of butterflies. I knew this would be amazing, but I didn't know it would be this amazing.
That was me a couple of months ago on a mountain in central Mexico.
This is incredible.
Hey smart people, Joe here. Nearly every monarch butterfly in North America, tens of millions of them, flies to these mountain forests each winter. Not gonna lie, one of the most amazing sights I've ever witnessed. And it was not easy to get there. I had to fly on a plane, drive in a car, ride a horse, and hike to get up there. It's like 10,000 feet above sea level. But the only things those monarch butterflies needed to get there was their wings. and some of the coolest frickin' navigation biology I've ever heard of. Millions of tiny orange compasses with wings. Yeah, this is totally gonna change how you look at butterflies. The monarch butterfly migration is one of a kind. It's totally unmatched in the insect world. It's more like the migration of some birds. I mean, we're talking distances of up to 4,500 kilometers each way, north and south. But there's one big thing that makes this migration different from what birds and other animals do. It actually takes multiple generations of butterflies to do it. And as you're about to learn, that's what makes it so amazing. Our journey starts in spring as monarchs make their way north. It's a leapfrog kind of journey. Each generation flies, mates, lays their eggs, and ultimately dies as it passes the baton to the next generation. Now, a typical adult monarch only lives for 2 to 6 weeks, so it takes 4, sometimes 5 generations to make the trip north. The fading light of summer marks the end of their northern migration. Shorter days and cooler temperatures prompt female butterflies to lay a special generation of eggs. When they hatch, the caterpillars that emerge are very different from their parents. They'll grow up to be part of a super generation. These super generation butterflies will fly all the way to Mexico in a single generation. Now, most things about a monarch's life, metamorphosis, migrating, mating, are controlled by hormones, chemicals in their bodies that signal different activities. Super generation monarchs make less of one special hormone, and this essentially prevents them from aging. They live about 8 times longer than other monarchs. I mean, think about that. Same species, totally different lifespan, like one of us living past 400. This super generation also develops differently as adults. They're bigger, they can fly farther, and they can't reproduce. Okay, but here's the thing. How does a bug with a brain the size of a sesame seed know it's supposed to go to a tree in Mexico, thousands of kilometers away? And how does it find its way to a place it's never been? Luckily, my friend Jason was in Mexico with me.
My name is Jason Goldman.
And he is literally the perfect person to explain it.
I'm a science journalist on a wildlife and conservation beat. But before I started doing journalism, I was a scientist and I studied animal cognition. So it's really remarkable that these insects with like 1 million neurons in a brain the size of a sesame seed can get from the northernmost parts of North America 2,000-3,000 miles to these forests in Mexico relatively accurately and relatively effectively. Absolutely blows my mind. Almost every biological organism has some kind of an internal clock. In humans, our roughly 24-hour cycle tells us when to wake up, when to go to sleep, when to eat. Monarch butterflies actually have 2 internal clocks.
One clock inside their brains is called the circannual clock. It keeps track of annual cycles. It's what tells them it's time to pack their bags and head south for the winter. The other clock is the key to their navigation.
There's very few animals that we know of that really have a true mental map. The monarch butterflies, they don't have a route to follow, but they do have a heading. What we do know is that they have a compass in their minds.
It's a solar compass that tells time. Let me explain. Monarch's main navigation trick is reading the horizontal position of the sun. But the sun moves from east to south to west throughout the day. So to keep pointing yourself in one direction relative to the sun, you also have to know what time it is. Only butterflies don't wear wristwatches, so how do they do it? Or remember earlier how Jason said that monarchs have a second internal clock?
Monarch butterflies actually have 2 internal clocks.
Well, I always thought that butterfly antennae were just like long, skinny noses, but these antennae do way more than just sniff. My buddy Phil Torres was down there with me. He's a butterfly expert, and he blew my mind when he told me this.
So that antenna is telling them what time of day it is. And then they use the information from their eyes and the location of the sun to then orient to the right direction.
Are you kidding me? That's incredible. That's how humans navigated at sea for like 1,000 years using advanced tools and mathematics. And these butterflies are doing it with pinhead brains. Okay, keep it together, Hanson. Let's break down how this sun compass works. Say your internal clock tells you it's mid-morning. If you're supposed to be heading south-southwest, then the sun should be on your left. If your antenna clock tells you that it's late afternoon, the sun should be on your right. Special cells in your compound eyes can even find the sun on cloudy days using polarized light. Pretty genius navigation system. Scientists have actually tested this by putting monarch butterflies in flight simulators and then watching how they orient themselves. These monarchs spend all winter here in Mexico, basically hibernating, living off stored energy. But as spring arrives in these mountain forests, their internal seasonal clock tells them it's time for the supergeneration to leave. And something changes in their bodies. That hormone that they didn't have that kept them from aging, they start making it, and they become reproductively active. Very reproductively active. They begin their journey north, tracking the sun again. Their inner compass somehow flips direction. Sadly, in a few short weeks, every one of these supergeneration butterflies will be dead. But not before the females lay the eggs that will become the next generation to carry on this great migration. What makes this so incredible to me is that the butterflies that journey south are reading a map passed down from great-great-grandparents who died half a year before they were born.
It seems like it's almost magic, but the truth is that these skills are written into their genetics. And since the genetics get passed down generation to generation, of course these behaviors get passed down with it. Even if each individual generation doesn't need those skills, eventually one of them will take advantage of it.
There's evidence that monarch butterflies have been making this journey for millions of years. It's an instinct, a behavior that's built into their body. Their sun compass, their antenna clock are written in their genes, an unbroken chain of DNA stretching back millions of generations. But there are still more mysteries to solve. It's not enough for the butterflies to know where they're going. They also need to know where they are. And we don't know what makes them stop here in this Mexican forest. And if we want to solve that mystery, we need to make sure the butterflies keep coming back.
We're on the lookout for a very special plant. Where is it? This is it. This is it right here. This is milkweed, a native milkweed. This is the plant that the butterflies need to lay their eggs on. This is what the caterpillars will grow up eating in order to make the next generation. And if we're lucky, yes, a monarch has been here and laid an egg. Preserving the monarch migration is about more than just preserving that forest in Mexico. It's about preserving plants like this and places like this, flowers that give them nectar to fuel that migration. It's about protecting more than just a behavior, it's about protecting a habitat that stretches across an entire continent. And that's something that we can all play a part in. Gives you something to think about, and maybe something to chew on. Stay curious.
We just watched as the monarch butterfly made its population migration to spend multiple generations, fly thousands of miles, and return to their native homelands in Mexico to overwinter and prepare to make the journey next spring. Their connections to biotic and abiotic forces are significant. I want to take you into the oceans to see some examples we have all been introduced to already. Maybe not the way we have seen them before. The fascination of oceans took an interesting dive in 1975 when Steven Spielberg minted Jaws. This scared everyone out of the open water. That fear remained in place until 1984 when Tom Hanks and Daryl Hannah brought the Little Mermaid sequel into a realm of a love story in Splash. This welcomed us back into the sea life where we were free again. Tom Hanks even learned to swim, finally. That expanded in 2003 when Finding Nemo invited my kids and grandkids into a wonderland where fish and other sea critters share space, interact in search of humor, and where fathers worry about their kids heading off to school. Well, school of fish. Yeah, I get it. This zone of fun has been great to experience for kids of all ages. Now I will take you back into the water to see these characters again. I will catch your attention as we look at those colorful sea stars. slowly crawling on the seafloor in search of some clams to invite for dinner. We will transition to learn about sea otters, another cute and cuddly mammal, and how they intermingle with creepy crawly urchins. We will then meet Dr. Bob Payne, University of Washington, as he talks with us about sea stars and sea otters on Little Tatoosh Island on the northwestern extent of continental USA. Located in the Makah Indian Nation lands, his 30-year-long experiment set the standard to establish Keystone Species' impact and importance. Then we will look into Riberia, frogs, and herons. Their lives are packed full of interactions and shocking revelations. I was shocked to see what happens next.
Like an advancing army, the sea stars move into position, slowly but surely working their way up toward their victims. The mussels cannot run or fight. All they can do is hide within their shells as their killers crawl over their bodies. Sensory tube feet sweep over the tightly packed mass of shells, searching for any gap in the mussel's defenses. Settling on its victim, the sea star hunkers down and begins its attack. The miniature camera, tucked within the mussel's shell, gives us the first look ever at the carnage that unfolds here every day. Once the tube feet have physically breached the mussel's defensive line, the sea star's translucent stomach begins the final assault. The animal actually pushes its stomach inside the mussel's shell, unfolding like a fatal flower. The stomach unleashes a volley of chemical weapons, digestive juices that dissolve the mussel's soft pink flesh. All that's left is a nutrient-rich soup, a broth that's quickly absorbed by the sea star. Having assimilated the mussel, the sea star's stomach pulls away, and the animal moves on, leaving behind an empty shell. Without the benefit of speed, brains, or brawn, sea stars are amazingly successful predators.
So when you're watching sea otters, you're probably watching them eat, because they have an incredible warm fur, but they don't have a lot of blubber. So what that means is metabolically, they need to eat a lot. So when you're watching sea otters, they're generally eating or digesting. With the fur trade that happened in the 18th and 19th century, it eliminated one of the top predators, sea otters. And with that came this cascade of indirect effects. All of the prey that sea otters ate could all of a sudden increase in numbers and even in size. And people on the coast then became increasingly reliant on these shellfish for food to feed their families, for livelihoods, for their jobs. With the increase in some of these shellfish fisheries came the erosion of kelp forests, because one of those major shellfish are sea urchins. So as soon as you start messing with sea urchins, you have dramatic changes from kelp forest systems to urchin-barren systems. So with the recovery or return of sea otters, a conflict has arisen. And managing this conflict and understanding the multiple trade-offs associated with this conflict is what the Pew Fellowship is about. Then what we want to do is start designing ecosystem-based management policies that account for not only the ecological dynamics, but also the social dynamics and the cultural dynamics at play. The oceans are so incredibly important to humanity, yet they're difficult to study and they're ridiculously easy to exploit and damage. And so we need to understand how oceans work, how we impact them, so that we can better make use of them wisely.
There's a small island off the Washington coast where the diversity of life in a single tide pool rivals that of any rainforest or salmon stream. It's not quite land, not quite sea, but a great melting pot of living things fighting to survive between two different worlds. Owned by the Makah Nation, Tatoosh Island is among the richest temperate tidal systems in the world. It is a ritual that has evolved into one of the longest ongoing studies of a single area by the same scientist in the nation. For over 30 years, at least 12 times a year, University of Washington zoologist Bob Payne passes a century of sea lions and endures the greeting of gulls to come to Tatoosh, a place he loves more than any other.
Just look around it. I don't love the gulls, but I love the scenery, the rock walls, the violence in the winter storms. I even like the fog, and I don't mind the rain, and I've never been affected by cold. The place is a paradise of biology.
Tatoosh offers this scientist and his research students a few rustic buildings to use as shelter, remnants of when the Coast Guard occupied the island. Although Payne and his students are here to study how the wars of nature work, there's nothing militant about their experiments. Most are here to observe the natural connections that occur in the intertidal zone, a place where life is continually competing for survival.
Disturbance. Might is right out here to some extent. The more effective competitive species are larger, and because they're larger, they're more subject to wave damage. And so winter storms remove them, and that basically produces a regional balance of species. No one species takes it all.
A tinkerer by nature, Bob Payne isn't above manufacturing a few disturbances of his own. His experiment on the connection between starfish and mussels resulted in one of the most important principles of modern ecology, a principle called Keystone Species. It proves that certain species are critically important to the balance of an ecosystem. Keystone Species is the most striking example of how the living world is interconnected.
This is called the glacier, and it's an experiment I started in 1970 and maintained until 1995, so it's a 25-year-long experiment. And what it involved was simply the removal of this starfish you see along the walls here and on the rock bench here. On this side, the starfish were retained, and that's called a control. In the background there, I removed starfish.
In the area where they were left to eat the mussels, the starfish opened up space for dozens of other species to flourish. Where Bob continually removed the starfish, the mussels crowded out most other life forms. The starfish is a keystone species because it has a critical effect on the entire ecosystem.
It sent a very strong signal that, in fact, all species weren't equal. Some species have major effects, others don't. But it means that one can't be careless. If one makes a mistake and eliminates, for whatever reason, a critical species from a system, the system will change.
One example of how a system changed involves the connection between kelp, urchins, and sea otters. Kelp beds are the ocean's nurseries, vital feeding grounds for young fish and a host of other organisms. Urchins eat kelp. Otters eat urchins. When otters were hunted to near extinction, the urchins were left unchecked to decimate kelp forests, affecting fish populations and everything up the food chain. The loss of the otter, another keystone species, dramatically changes the diversity of life, leaving a once complex ecosystem simplified and weakened.
You know, it would be a tragedy and it would be irresponsible to not recognize the fact that one can push systems too far. They do collapse, and we have some sort of moral responsibility to not only understand what the conditions are, but not to push systems that far.
Riberia is a trematode, a type of flatworm that transforms through several hosts. It hitchhikes between frogs, birds, and snails. Once a bird eats an infected frog, the worms reproduce sexually within the bird's stomach, and their eggs hitch a ride on the bird's feces, making their way into the ponds and marshes. When they hatch, the eggs release larvae that infects snails. Once inside, the larvae reproduce asexually to produce another form of larva that creates cysts around the developing limbs of tadpoles. The result is not only visually ghastly, but a harbinger of a wider problem across multiple animal populations.
In the southern states of America, an even stranger parasitic story recently emerged. Frogs began to appear with extra limbs and other deformities. These mysterious mutants were believed to be the result of chemical or radioactive pollution. The full story is stranger still. Herons that eat the frogs also acquire their parasites. The birds pass the eggs of parasitic flatworms in their droppings. Snails eat the eggs, which soon hatch and emerge as mini parasites. Each searches for the nearest tadpole. With torpedo precision, it tracks its target. It aims for the limb buds. As it burrows inside, cells explode. The fragmented limb buds try to regrow, but in the process they create several legs instead of one. The parasite creates a mutant for one simple purpose. Deformed frogs make easy prey. If its gruesome life cycle is to continue, its host must be eaten by a heron.
We've been looking at keystone species, like the sea otter and the Pisaster acranchus starfish. You will often find that keystone species are the top predators in their ecosystems. When the top predators were removed, the natural balance was disrupted. But when we looked into the life cycle of Riberia, it became very different. It seems that the top predator in this production is the heron, but that heron is not the one directly issuing the population changes. That fell to a flatworm parasite who infested snails, made them sterile, then used the shell as a breeding scape so they could continue the cycle as they infected tadpoles, gave them a few extra limbs, and made them into heron snacks. The cycle continues as the flatworm parasite re-enters the belly of the heron. Who is the keystone species here? Is this even considered as a keystone species issue? Parasites are considered as being part of food webs, competitive interactions, biodiversity patterns, and the regulation of keystone species. Parasites contribute to how ecological communities form. They serve complex community ecology positions. This topic is relevant to further integrate parasitism into community ecology. This defines and improves our understanding of the roles of parasites in nature. Parasites can function as both predators and prey. The role of parasites as predators and prey suggests that considerable amounts of energy may directly flow through parasites in food webs, despite their small size and cryptic nature. We consider these ecosystem effects induced by keystone species and their prey, based on a spatial and temporal scale. We begin spatially. These divisions are somewhat arbitrary. where on this screen, Mega is assigned global scope. It may only apply continentally or even regionally. The interpretations of meso and macro must then be adjusted accordingly. When we physically touch the environment, we generally stay at the micro scale. That is where we start, but often it has unanticipated expansion to larger scales like meso and macro scale. This is where we begin pulling together the perspectives of the biome to focus conditions through plant communities, wildlife, and abiotic conditions we encounter. We need to retain our perspective to understand our impacts. Environmental challenges present problems of scale. This is fundamental for environmental problems that involve ecological constraints. Consider each issue as to scale in a broad social sense. Examine the effects of social values on the scale at which we experience the world. Spatial aspects represent a complex and highly interactive dynamic as they are applied to the temporal metric. It is the study of space or the area experienced, which is itself an important, if somewhat neglected, branch of environmental studies. This spatial and temporal approach emphasizes our sense of place. People value objects from a particular perspective, oftentimes a perception very personal to the observer. The scale of space that people perceive as their sphere of action imposes a shape on their consciousness. Determining which dynamics require special protection is an evaluative task that can only be done from an individual's perspective. Scale is at the heart of all these problems, but we cannot choose appropriate scalars to focus on until we understand both ecological functions and analytic procedures. These intercept at many levels. In this sense, the emergence of an ecological approach to environmental management embodies a shift in language and hence a resolution to pay attention to different aspects of nature as we examine management options. Because nature is irreducibly complex and there exist countless correct descriptions of nature, we focus only on a few of these as helpful in deciding how to live. These choices focus on a particular dynamic to measure, however subtly, usher in value judgments of the analyst. These are embodied in our decisions regarding what variables to monitor, measure, and find meaning in. If we seek primarily those issues determined most important to the big perspective issues, then we would overlook the monumental phenomena of monarch butterflies who traverse 5 generations in 1 year. Their population migration is spent within a year, all moving in mass from southern reaches of North America to the northern climes, then back again. These common tiger wanderers are not inconsequential, so do not treat them like they are. Our explorations have been focused on the biotic side of the ledger, as we explored the interactions between species, especially the trophic levels. Those top carnivores put all players in their ecosystems into a cause and effect push, where balance is the state of equilibrium. We now look to the abiotic side to confirm the interactions of the biotic players in respect to how the environment responds. The 1988 Yellowstone fires together formed the largest wildfire complex in the history of Yellowstone National Park. Starting as many smaller individual fires, the flames quickly spread out of control with the increasing winds and drought and combined into one large conflagration, which burned for several months. The fire almost destroyed 2 major visitor destinations, and on September 8, 1988, the entire park was closed to all non-emergency personnel for the first time in its history. Only the arrival of cool and moist weather in the late autumn brought the fires to an end. A total of 793,880 acres, that is 3,213 square kilometers, or 36% of the park, was scorched by wildfires. Wildland fires are not new to Yellowstone forests. We know they have been part of the natural ecological cycle because certain tree species are genetically adapted to periodic wildfires. Some trees, like the lodgepole pine, have serotinous cones which release viable seed when the heat of wildfires rage. The restrictive environment enables adaptive responses of the species thriving and surviving on these sites. In forest wildlife ecology, we have a measure of fire return intervals to estimate how frequently forestland sites experience natural wildfire events. At Yellowstone National Park, the 1988 wildfires were conceptually repeated in 2013. However, this 25-year gap did not see a reburn of the same areas. Different forests, untouched in 1988, were burned in 2013. Much of Yellowstone National Park holds a 300-year fire return interval. When these wildfires strike, they are stand-replacing fires. On some forestland sites, wildfire recurrence is frequent, like at Kamiak Butte, where the wildfire return interval has historically been about 12 years. These fires are low-intensity surface fires, at least when they reoccur on this 12-year frequency. Trees like ponderosa pine, found on the south-facing aspects, has a thick bark tolerant of surface fires. Plant recovery is relatively rapid. Sliding back to Yellowstone National Park, we can look to the fires of 1988. This lodgepole pine site was burned heavily, killing all trees, but not incinerating the tree stems totally. Many remained standing dead. Lodgepole pine is an aggressive pioneer species. It readily establishes itself on most burned-out areas. Exceptions do occur, especially in areas with low incidence of closed cones. Without periodic fire, lodgepole pine tends to be replaced by more shade-tolerant species, like Engelmann spruce and subalpine fir. In the montane and subalpine zones of the Rocky Mountains, fire interrupts this succession and initiates another stand of lodgepole pine. In mixed stands, the proportion of lodgepole pine will increase with each recurring fire. Again, the serotinous cone habit is a major mechanism that enables lodgepole pine to become established at the expense of associated species. Only western larch approaches lodgepole pine in aggressively restocking burned areas. Do you notice the 2070 photograph? Is that my time machine again? Well, in a way, it is. We have a branch of forestry studying forest biometrics, using the data we collect through forest inventory samples, like tree species, diameter breast height, tree height, and an increment bore core sample. We combine these with abiotic site characteristics to make projections about tree growth. This gives us the ability to grow these trees to make projections about future tree characteristics like tree volume, wildlife habitat qualities, physical site water flow and nutrient cycling. The stand prognosis model was developed at the U.S. Forest Service Research Station in Moscow, Idaho in 1982, using the forests of North Idaho and eastern Washington. Personally, I have been using this model since its coding to the personal computer in 1988. It is a tool we use as we model the management activities we implement on forest lands to see anticipated results into the future. These days, I use it to model carbon sequestration as trees age, expressing this carbon account in terms of tree boles, crowns, and even roots. Biological organization is a hierarchy of complex biological structures and systems that define life. The traditional hierarchy extends from atoms to biospheres, and this globe. The higher levels of this scheme are often referred to as an ecological organization concept. This is our study of hierarchical ecology. Spatial ecology studies the ultimate distributional or spatial unit occupied by species. We drill into the biosphere to find individuals which have been shaped by the combination of restrictive environments and competition with other species in their individual zones of influence to fill their niche. In a particular habitat shared by several species, each organism is usually confined to its own microhabitat, or spatial niche, because two species in the same general territory cannot usually occupy the same ecological niche for any significant length of time. In nature, Organisms are neither distributed uniformly nor at random, forming instead some sort of spatial pattern. This is due to various energy inputs, disturbances, and species interactions that result in spatially patchy structures or gradients. This spatial variance in the environment creates diversity in communities of organisms, as well as in the variety of the observed biological or ecological events. The type of spatial arrangement present may suggest certain interactions within and between species, such as competition, predation, and reproduction. We watched the interactions between species scattered across the biotic realm, each reacting to the abiotic environments they experience. I mentioned the context of how important our perceptions are as we make investigations about the resources we examine. However, this goes deeper into how we analyze interactions. We all have a perceptual bearing on what it means to communicate, right? Maybe it is time to reconsider this assumption.
What do you think you're doing?
The idea of talking trees has been capturing the human imagination for generations.
Did you say something? My bark is worse than my bite.
Okay, so maybe they don't talk to us, but it turns out trees can talk to each other.
The trees are speaking to each other.
But that does beg the question, what do trees have to talk about? And can we learn to speak their language?
Talking trees. What do trees have to talk about?
Underneath the soil, a vast and interconnected network of life links the trees through their root systems. But they can't talk to each other without help. The whole process starts with hub trees, the oldest and tallest trees in the forest. Hub trees have greater access to sunlight, and through the process of photosynthesis, end up producing more sugar than they actually need. Underground, fungi need sugar to survive. Most of their bodies are made up of a mass of threads called mycelium. They grow within the root system of trees to absorb the excess sugar. In return, the mycelium provides the tree with the nutrients it needs from the soil. This symbiotic relationship is known as mycorrhiza, which stems from the Greek words for fungus and root. These tree-fungi relationships connect the trees in the forest together, forming an underground communication network to exchange water and nutrients, to nurture their seedlings, and even send warning signals when under threat. So, how many trees are really talking to each other? To get a better picture of these forest relationships, a team of researchers used DNA analysis to map a fungal network in a patch of Canadian forest. Remarkably, they found that one tree was connected to 47 other trees. Their models also showed that when hub trees were removed, it would cause more connections to be lost than if trees were simply removed randomly. Studying these kinds of underground exchanges will play a vital role in creating stronger, more resilient forests for the future. So even though we might not be able to talk to trees, at least we can still keep trying to understand their language. Who knows what they might say?
Honestly, you came to my classroom to learn about natural resource ecology. Then you hear me, a forester, a natural resource manager, an economist, and a happy husband, father, and grandfather. I'm pretty sure you did not come to learn about psychology from me, right? Well, this is really where they are all connected. Just as I introduced in the premise of this show, all events are interconnected, and nothing is inconsequential. So, don't treat them like they are.
Economics is not the answer. We have to develop and teach an environmental ethic which says that all these species have a right to coexist with us on this planet. Putting it in economic terms simply won't work. It's something everyone understands, the power of money, but conservation in the broadest sense requires more than that.
We humans impact the biodiversity of the world more than any other creature. We can alter ecosystems much more efficiently than anything in nature. We are the greatest keystone species of all.
Biodiversity feeds us, nurtures us, produces the air we breathe, cleanses our water. We need it, probably more than it needs us.